So here's the fear inventory. If I can get to this place where I realize the light can't exist without the darkness, that there is no duality, there isn't good and bad, everything is just the way it is.
Well, hello, friends of Bill W. and other friends. You have landed on Sober Speak. My name is John M. I am an alcoholic, and we are glad you're all here, especially newcomers. Newcomers, that is, both to recovery as a whole and newcomers to this podcast. Sober Speak is a podcast about recovery centered around the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. My job here on Sober Speak is simple. My job is to provide a platform to the amazing stories of recovery all around us. Consider Sober Speak, if you will, your meeting between meetings. Please remember, we do not speak for AA or any 12-step community. We represent only ourselves. We are here to share our experience, strength, and hope with those who wish to come along for the ride. Take what you want and leave the rest at the curb for the trash man to pick up. Well, hello, my little quarantine chickadees. That was the voice of Mr. Bill C. One more time. When I say one more time, we've had him on many episodes before that you heard at the beginning of this episode. And you're going to hear so much more from him in just a moment. But first things first. This episode, right here, right now, is brought to you by Leon and Victoria. You know what Leon and Victoria did? Leon and Victoria went to our website, soberspeak.com. They clicked on the little yellow donate tab and they made a contribution. Thank you so much, Leon and Victoria, for your generous contribution. This episode is coming right out to both of you. As normal, we are going to let all the other folks listen on in, but this episode is coming right out to you guys. Thank you very much. I, John M., will be the chairperson for this meeting between meetings, and I am truly honored and privileged to be serving all of you listening in. So, take a seat, if you will, around this virtual table, and let's get started. All right, so I told you all a couple weeks ago or so that I'd be setting up a Sober Speak live event, and I was working back and forth with Brenda J on getting a live event set up via Zoom, and I just heard back from her today. You know what? She's in such a demand right now that if we get something and maybe toward the end of May or into June or something like that with her, so I'm going to look at some other alternatives for a live event so we can all get together on a Zoom meeting and watch each other and stare at each other and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to try to put something together here soon. So, I don't know if you guys are like me, but I've been walking around the past 3 weeks, and every day I just kind of look around and go, this is so strange. This is so strange. This is so weird. What is going on here with this lockdown, whatever you want to call it, self-quarantine? And, anyway, so far, so good, except for the people who have been affected directly, and my prayers go out to them and their family. But overall, though, it's just been a very, very strange experience. I'm sure you can relate. All these Zoom meetings that we're having in AA, I like them, and I'm so thankful they're there. They are there. But it just doesn't replace that face-to-face, and it just doesn't replace that how do I put this? It doesn't replace when a newcomer walks into the room and we can put our arms around him or her and say, we're glad you're here. We're so glad you found us. We love you. We need you. We want you to be here. And it just doesn't replace that. But hopefully things will get back to what do you want to call that? Normal pretty soon. I also wanted to let you know that last week, if you listened to listener feedback, and who wouldn't? I mean, really, who wouldn't stop down and listening to all of listener feedback? I'm sure none of you ever stop listening once we get to listener feedback, do you? Anyway, if you were listening to listener feedback last week, I mentioned that my daughter had gotten a chameleon. That's part of what she was doing with some of her spare time that she has nowadays. Went to the pet store, got a chameleon, and I was a little, I thought we maybe had a defective chameleon because it wasn't changing colors. But guess what? I was wrong. It does change colors. And they were telling me that I believe that the females maybe don't change colors or something like that. I don't quite understand. But all I know is I was happy as a camper to see that chameleon on the top of its cage, hanging upside down, with its eyes going 360 degrees around and changing colors, and eating a cricket from like, I don't know, like 10 feet away or something like that. It was just like, I couldn't even believe what that thing could do with its tongue. I'll just leave it at that. But nonetheless, I had some weird jokes going through in the back of my head. But I am so glad the chameleon can actually change colors. I've been walking around a lot outside lately. It's been kind of part of my daily routine to get out of the house and to take a walk around the neighborhood. And what I've noticed lately is there's some sidewalk chalk, a lot of sidewalk chalk out there. A lot of the kids have been going out, and some of them have been coloring their mailboxes. Some of them color the sidewalks. They color all kinds of things with this sidewalk. But the other day I was out and I was actually listening to some podcasts while I was out there walking around. No, not mine. I get tired of my own voice, but nonetheless, I was listening to some podcasts, and I noticed there was this writing on the pathway in front of me, and there's a pathway that goes kind of between the houses on the back side of the houses, and on the chalk it said "Stop right here." And I was like, okay, stop. And then I read it, and it said, look at the window over here. And it pointed to the window on the left-hand side. And as I turned around and I looked at the window, these kids had made all these kind of just happy drawings that they had plastered all over their window. And I thought, oh, that is fantastic. Where else would you have seen that except for during a time like this? And then a couple of weeks ago, because all the schools have been shut down and such, the teachers from the elementary school that I lived near, they decided to form a parade with their cars. So they had they had signs out their windows, and they were driving down the streets, and they were yelling, "Hi, everybody!" And they were honking their horns, and it was just a big parade going through a car parade going through the neighborhood. It was absolutely fantastic. I just loved it so much. People have been getting really creative. And I have been eating everything that's not tied down in the house. And I understand that this is a thing going around. They say that people are gay. Like when freshmen go off to college, they gain their freshman 15. Well, this apparently is called the COVID-19, and I am well on my way to gaining that 19 pounds. And I bet there are some of you out there in that same boat. Nonetheless, now I will stop yapping and we will get on to Mr. Bill C. Step 4. Listen, basically this whole episode is about Bill C. diving really into Step 4 at a deep level. He does a great job with it. But I will tell you this, but one of the more interesting parts of our conversation takes place for me on the beginning of this episode, where he talks about what it's like for him to have some level of notoriety, if you will, in AA, if we can get famous in AA, and what it's like to be what they call a circuit speaker. So you'll be hearing that and much more from Mr. Bill C. Ladies and gentlemen, please, without further ado, help me welcome Mr. Bill C. And as usual, I tried to say normal and then I switched it to usual. That's why it sounded like usual. As normal, we will have plenty of listener feedback at the end of this episode. And I know all of you will be listening in. Enjoy. Okay, everybody, we are once again sitting here with Mr. the one and only Mr. Bill C. Can you say hello, Mr. Bill C?
Bill Alcoholic. I'm here again.
You are here again. And your sobriety date, once again, for those who may not have heard you before?
March the 27th, 1985.
All right. So last time, Mr. Bill C. Well, before I go into that, we're going to talk about the steps. But I have a friend of mine here. His name's Kevin, actually, in the Dallas area, who, after he heard your episode last time I think it was on steps 1, 2, and 3. I'm not real sure which one he was listening to, but he called me and he said, "Oh my goodness, you had Bill C on the podcast." He said, "Bill C is like a sensei to me." I'd heard that term before, but it had been a while. So I'm assuming you get that sometimes. And last time we were on here, you talked a little bit about how, you have a different perspective on where you are within AA now versus where you were when you first started and trying to kind of scratch your way to the top, so to speak, in an anonymous organization. But when you get people who say that to you, "Oh my goodness, Bill C, it's Bill C." What goes through your mind? What do you think?
Well, I like it. The story I've told a lot was, the first time that somebody looked at me with respect in their eyes, I didn't know what that was. I'd never seen it before. And, if the way people perceive me is in a positive light, like someone that has helped them, someone that they admire, what a wonderful thing that is. Mm-hmm. What I can tell you is that sometimes it's hard to take because you feel like you don't deserve it.
What do you mean by that?
Well, nobody gets to AA with a whole lot of self-esteem. Mm-hmm. And the story I tell about that is that when I was out in the street, the first one we did, I talk about being the phony biker with the clip-on earring. And what happened to me in Alcoholics Anonymous is I became the phony AA guru. And I went through a period of emotional and mental collapse behind that. Now, it was the same guy that was the phony biker with the clip-on earring became the phony AA guru. Now, the second persona is a lot healthier, is a better. People got helped. I helped a lot of people and I did a lot of work. You can have it doesn't matter if you have a poor motivation to do things. If you do the things, you will be affected by the work, no matter what your motivation is. But you do reach a time in sobriety in that spiritual path and growing up emotionally where you start looking at the motivation. It stops working. If the reason I'm doing all this good work is to just build myself up and look better and become somebody, that becomes empty. So that's the point at which you feel you don't deserve the admiration that you're receiving, because you know that there's something suspicious about it. Mm. And the way I describe that is it's the death of the ego. Chunks of it begin to fall away, and it's very painful. It's not a pleasant experience. And my fall from grace was very public, and it was very difficult. It was very hard. And coming out the other side of that, as some years have gone by, the motivation for why you do it changes. And so now when somebody comes up to me and they
enamored somehow,
they're enamored and stuff, there's a sweetness about that can sometimes bring you to tears. It's just such a sweet and loving thing. People just want to come up and love on you sometimes. And I get that. There's people I feel that way about, you know. I was just madly in love with Scott Redmond. You know, I just wanted to be Scott Redmond, you know, and in some respects I've done that, you know. I think about him every day. You know, he was my dear friend. I lost him. He died, and it broke my heart. One time I was standing in a hallway with Sandy Beach at a conference, and a bunch of people came up and they were looking at the two of us and bowing and being all cute and funny. And they walked away, and Sandy said, "God, don't you hate it when they do that?" And I looked at him and went, "No, man." I said, "I'm glad to be in the same category as you. If that's what's happening, what the hell?" And we both just laughed, you know. It's like, because you can't help but laugh at yourself. I think part of being emotionally mature and moving down the spiritual path is being able to laugh at who you think you are, you know. And you know, I've been doing it long enough, been around long enough to where, you know, I enjoy the warmth, but I try not to get too carried away with it. My wife will go with me when I speak sometimes, and we have kind of a running joke, but it's an acknowledgement of my own egoic nature. She'll get in the car with me and we'll be driving home from a speaking thing, and I'll look at her and I go, "Well, how wonderful was I?" And we have that. I mean, why pretend like you're not thinking that, you know? And she's my best critic. So what you do is you expose yourself, you expose it, you know. But, you know, you hear speakers get up at a podium and sometimes they'll say, "Oh, I hate doing this. There's so much ego in it, you know, and I'm the only one looking in that direction. You're all looking, I'm not part of." Don't believe them. We absolutely love it. If we didn't, we wouldn't do it, right? There is an aspect of it. Do I feel like maybe I'm helping some people? Of course. But there's also, it's me being the center of attention. What's not to like? You know, can you imagine the futility of taking a person like myself? I'm an extrovert by nature. I like being around people. When I'm sitting here at my house and there's nobody around for a couple hours, I'll call some, try to get them to come over. I like having people around me. I enjoy the energy of it all. Could you imagine me trying to be different than that? Trying to make myself be different, this false humility couched in spiritual pride. You know, like I hear people say, "Well, I quit speaking. There's too much ego in it." You know, when I said that to my sponsor, I said, "I think I should quit speaking at meetings. There's too much ego in it." You know, I just went through this big collapse at 10 years sober, you know, and I go, "Man, there's something wrong. I need to shut up. There's something wrong with me." And so I went to him, and one of the things I said, "I think I should quit speaking at meetings." His counsel to me was, "You don't get to pick and choose what you will and won't do. You're not in charge of this. But I might suggest to you the next time you're speaking in front of a group of people, why don't you try telling the truth?" And I go, "What do you mean? I'm not lying to people." He goes, "Bill, stop doing theater and start talking about what's really going on."
This is not America's Got Talent.
So I started doing that. And it was, you know, I stopped preaching and I started telling the story.
So do you remember that shift, like what that looked like from what you were saying during the first 10 years versus what happened after that?
The first time that I can recall, you know, after that conversation, and it was the Rodney King riots, and we went to we spoke at a club at the Crenshaw Alano Club in South Central Los Angeles, and there was the flames and were still going on. There was a group of us went in a van from the central office, and we went down there and spoke. And I got up at the podium and I started talking about ego. And I just thought, what the hell? I mean, I couldn't think of anything else to do. I'll start talking about what I'm feeling and just start talking and try to do it in an AA context. It's not like group therapy, but I started talking about, I'm up here and you're down there, and I love that. You're all listening to me, and I love that. I just started, and it was humorous. I mean, it was kind of humorous. It was more humorous I thought it was going to be. I mean, one of the things he said when he told me that, he says, if you start telling the truth, we will understand. Like, who do you think you're talking to? You're not that different, I mean, you're just not that goddamn special, And I start talking about ego, and you could see half the room would groan and the other half would nod their head, I mean, but both sides were identifying. Oh my God, he's saying it out loud. It's like that. Isn't that funny? Look at that guy. And what I remember from that is, I got down, and all these people, those people couldn't have been more gracious to us. We're in a totally black community. They knew we were nervous, and they were just so loving. It's AA. You forget where you are sometimes. I mean, it transcends color barriers and religion, everything. It's remarkable. And that particular evening was especially like that. They were very kind. They were really grateful that we showed up. I mean, it was really something. But what I remember is I'm standing in this crowd, and I see this very tall, older black man walking toward me through the crowd, and he's looking right at me, and he's grinning like he knew exactly what I was talking about, And he came up to me, and he put his arm around me, and he says, "You're going to be okay." And it still chokes me up. That's all he said. You didn't need to say, because he knew that I knew that he knew that I knew that, he'd gone through the same thing, probably at some level. And so I started, what my sponsor said, telling the truth, which is essentially talk about what's really going on. It's not like dumping it. I mean, like you hear people say, the longer I'm sober, the less I know. All I can think of when I hear somebody say that is, aren't you paying attention? What do you mean? I get it. It's some kind of spiritual thing. Some sort of false humility thing. But my God, man, I've been sober for 34 years. I should know some stuff. I should have something to bring to the table. I know a hell of a lot more about life than I did 30 years ago. I mean, my God, you just pick stuff. You can sit in a room and do nothing and pick some stuff up. I mean, it's like that. So I try to convey that from a very human perspective. Here's my story. Here's what's going on with me. Why would I pretend that I don't enjoy what I do? Why would I pretend that? Why would I pretend that the only reason I'm talking to you people is because I'm trying to help you poor miserable souls? And God has sent, come on, it's a party. This is a pleasure. People say you sacrifice so much. It's not a sacrifice. It's not a sacrifice. It's not what it is. Is it inconvenient sometimes? Oh, absolutely. Life is inconvenient. I mean, sure, you end up in places you don't particularly want to go to you'd rather, sure, of course, but that's not a sacrifice. That's just me being self-centered. It's like, I'm lazy, but my experiences over the years is that when I don't want to go somewhere and I go anyway, invariably I have a pretty good time, or something interesting happens, or something, and that happens to you often enough, you just quit trying to manage and control it. Because clearly this is what I'm supposed to do, I mean, one time when I got really sick with the liver thing, and I was still trying to get out and talk, and my sponsor was trying to get me to stop, and and I just, I'd been doing it for so long, I just didn't, it was hard to say no. And my grand sponsor, Paul, called me up one day. This guy is a former trustee of AA, really great guy, just a good man. He calls me up and he says, Bill, if you let it, Alcoholics Anonymous will chew you up and spit you out. And I said, but Paul, they need me. And he said, oh my God, it's worse than I thought. And one of the things I've learned over the years, AA doesn't need me. It doesn't need me. It's just my turn sometimes, but it doesn't need me. There's plenty of people. Scott Redmond told me one time, he said, when you get up at the podium, look out in the audience and tell yourself that anybody in the room can give the talk. It's just your turn. And he said, because you know what would happen? If you died from a heart attack at the podium, you know what they would do, don't you? And I said, they would drag me off. Somebody would replace me and they would end the meeting on time. And he goes, exactly. That's how important you are in the scheme of things, And I believe that. I think that's literally true. I'm not that special. Sometimes it's my turn. Mm-hmm. Oh, I went to Cliff one time and I drove down to Oceanside and I took him out to dinner. And he says, you're going to pay, aren't you? And I go, I always pay, Cliff. Get in the car. So I took him out to dinner and I'm talking to him about speaking. He spoke all over the world and, for a long time. And he was he was the first real circuit speaker I ever heard back in the day. And I just really cherished his relationship. And anyway, I asked him, I said, there's a lot of ego in it. And I wonder about that. And how have you handled that? And he goes, yeah, he says, yeah, you're right. He says, you have to have enough ego to get up there and do it. But he says, I'll tell you something, Bill. If you're the Saturday night speaker at a conference, they're looking for entertainment. Don't be afraid to use your skills. He said, but at a local meeting somewhere, it's different. Sometimes it's more heartfelt, and there is truth to that. There certainly is truth to that. But all of that has been a great gift in my life. But I'll tell you something about it. If all I'm doing is speaking at meetings, I'm not really doing AA. If I'm working with guys and reading the book and working the steps with guys, then I've got something to talk about. And that's what we're doing here, talking about the steps. That's my job. I'm an AA cheerleader. But, there needs to be some content. I think what AA is, it's about recovery from alcoholism. That's what we're supposed to be talking about. And I think the sober story is a lot more interesting than the drunken one. Certainly there needs to be identification. But, the people that I looked up to and admired over the years when they go speak somewhere, people that really talk about the process. Because when I'm in the audience, I want to hear what you think about what's going on. Talk to me about what's really going on. How do you do this thing? How did you do it? I'm interested in that. And I'm much more interested in your sober story. That's that story of sobriety and working through the problems in life than I am about you drunk. I identify with the drunkalog. I've got one too. I'll put mine up against yours and let's see who was the worst piece of shit in the world. It's like we all can do that. And I get the identification thing. I think it's important. But really, I'm really interested in what you think's going on now. What are you doing now? How have you dealt with this? That kind of thing. I think that's fascinating. One of the great resources that we have in AA is you walk up to people and you ask them something. People love to talk about themselves. And there's an immense amount of wisdom in Alcoholics Anonymous. There's an immense amount of experience combined with intellect. We are a society of storytellers. That's how we convey the message. We tell our stories to each other. And some of us in AA are really good storytellers. Really wonderful. Sandy Beach was a wonderful storyteller. Scott was wonderful. Many, Bob Bazans, a lot of wonderful storytellers, and that's an attractive thing.
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to do a little break here, and then we're going to go on into we'll talk about the third step a little. I'm so glad we ended up talking about that subject there. That was fantastic. We will be continuing our conversation with Bill C. in just a moment. Just a reminder, you're listening to SoberSpeak.com. You can find us on the World Wide Web, and you can listen to approximately 115, 120 other episodes for free. You can also find the donate button on our website, and you can use it. And if and only if the Spirit moves you to do such, please keep in mind this is a podcast funded by you, the listener. SoberSpeak is a self-supporting organization through our own contributions. We are not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. We do not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorse nor oppose any causes. All right. Now back to Mr. Bill C. So the last time that you and I got together, we, I should say you for the most part, spoke about step 3. And we got kind of to the end of step 3. Is there anything else you want to add on about step 3 before we go into steps 4 and possibly 5?
Oh, I think we're done. I think we can move on.
Okay. All right. So step 4, I know we talked about it a little bit last time. Fourth step, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. What are your thoughts?
So in the book, it shows 3 columns. It talks about, after the third step, it says we launched. And we're looking for the immovable parts of the inventory. Every business that is successful has to have good inventory control. And what you're looking for when you do an inventory is you're looking for the stuff that's not moving, that's not selling, and you want to get rid of it, so you can fill it with stuff that is movable. So we're looking for the negative parts. It's not a list of the good and the bad. You can do that if you want, but specifically in the book, it's looking for that stuff that's not moving. And there's 3 categories. There's resentments, there's fears, and there's these broken relationships or sexual behavior. What were my faults and mistakes, that kind of thing. So in the book, it shows 3 columns. There is a controversy in AA at some level of whether there are 4 columns or just 3. And when you read it, as you move on through the book, it talks about we return to the inventory, we look for our faults and mistakes. And many people interpret that to mean that there's a 4th column. So you essentially what you do is you have a resentment and you list that resentment. You say, my father. The second column is why were you resentful? He says, well, he abandoned me when I was a child, or he beat me, or whatever the list of transgressions were. The third column, it says, how was I affected by that behavior? So if you have 4 or 5 different things about your father that he did to you that caused you to be resentful, on each one of those things, you want to list how you were affected by that. Was it my personal relationships was affected by that? Did it instill fear in me? Did it affect my pocketbook? My financial security? And so you can, whatever you were affected by that, with a father, like it affected my self-esteem. It caused me to feel bad about myself, that there's something wrong with me. And then the 4th column, it says, what are my faults and mistakes? Now, many people say, what was my part in this resentment? And specifically in the book, it doesn't say that. It says, what were my faults and mistakes? People many times say, well, what was my part in this? Well, let's take an example here. Let's say that you were molested as a child, that your parent, one of your parents or your uncle or somebody close to the family molested you as a child. So you put that name on that list and say, I have resentment because I was molested. How did it affect me? How did it not affect me? It affected everything. It was a stunning experience. I'm still recovering from it. So if you said that 4th column, what was my part? What part could you possibly have played as an innocent child? Well, the answer is there's no part. You were truly a victim. Okay. You say, what are my faults and mistakes? Well, what mistake could I have made? Well, let's say you're 40 years old. If you're still carrying that resentment around, at the bare minimum, you're unforgiving. You have a resentment and you won't let go of it. You're unforgiving. And this isn't about the perpetrator. There's the feeling that, well, if I forgive this person, then I've condoned it. No, not at all. What you want to do is you want to rid yourself of this resentment. And in order to do that, you're going to have to forgive at some level. You might have to get professional help. There's things that you can do. But there was no part. But you do have a responsibility at some level. So that 4th column, or whatever you want to call it, Howard Poland's claim that there's no 4th column, that the fact that I believe there was a 4th column was an example of my stupidity. The guy was so brilliant. He made me feel stupid, and it took me a half an hour, 45 minutes to figure out that that's what he had done. It was expressed so beautifully, and that, what he would talk about is, well, it doesn't really matter. I'm a 4-column guy. We don't need to go into that kind of detail. If you're really that interested, you can drill down. Get his book, My Life on a Frozen Lake, Howard P. It's an excellent book. And he was one of the wonderful students of the process. But I was raised as a 4-column guy. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for my faults and mistakes. Now, this fourth column is going to be the source of identifying my defects of character. I was vengeful. I was arrogant. I was pompous. I instilled jealousy. Well, I'm pissed off at my first wife because she cheated on me with my friend. How did it affect me? It affected my personal relationships. It affected my self-esteem, everything. What was my fourth column? Well, maybe if I hadn't been messing around on her and been in the mental institution and was shooting dope and acting like a fool and running with an outlaw motorcycle gang, maybe she wouldn't have had to go look for love somewhere else. I had forgotten all that part. That's a classic one. Did I have a part to play? You bet. I played a big part in that. Okay. That's what we're looking for in this inventory. This is the part where it talks about I begin to take responsibility for my own life. At some point, in order for me to grow up emotionally, I have to quit blaming other people or institutions for the problems in my life. I am powerless over them. I have no control. I have to take responsibility for my own life. Does that mean that I was always guilty of something? Not necessarily. But there was at some point in time, I placed myself to be put in a position to be hurt. Like a lot of dark things happened to me in my life. Why was I hanging out with those people in the first place? Why was I in those places where those things happen, in those kind of dark places? What was I doing there? Why was I pretending to be an outlaw biker? Why was I hanging around in places where violence occurs on a regular basis? How did I end up in a mental institution? What was it I did? What was my lifestyle that caused me to have that kind of a mental breakdown? When I'd look at it, I'd come in and go, these things happened to me. Look at what happened to me. Did I play a part? You bet I did. Was I unconscious of it? Yes, I was unconscious of it. I wasn't awake. I was sound asleep. I thought it was all real, but I had no reason to be in those places to be hurt like that. And sometimes I was the perpetrator. Sometimes I hurt people. I played a part in all of that. So in this inventory, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for what my faults and mistakes are. Now, as the years have gone by, when I've done this with people, some over 20 years ago, my sponsor and I started taking groups through the steps. What would happen early on, I was always working with brand new guys because I was a pretty new guy. And that's who you get. As the years have gone by, I've gotten people now that ask me for help that have been sober a while and they're looking for a new experience. Some of them have gone through the process before. Most of them that I've run into have never really done the work. They've done a little inventory, but they never completed the amends process and they're not working with others. So the problem they're having in sobriety is obvious. It's pretty obvious. And they're looking for a new experience. Some of the people have actually done the work, and maybe something's changed in their life. Maybe their sponsor died, or they've moved on. Maybe their sponsor got loaded, and they're looking for something different. So what I started doing with my sponsor got me into this is we started taking groups of the steps using a manual. We first started using Dr. Paul's an unofficial guide to the 12 steps. And Paul put that together. It came out of a group in Texas that put this thing together, and Paul made a pamphlet out of it. And it was something he could take into prisons. Rather than the big hardcover book, he could take that into prisons. But so we started doing Dr. Paul's 12 steps, and it's designed for groups to go through the steps, through groups. It asks a series of questions, had formats to it. Then as years ago, we found another one, and it's my buddy Bill Shaberg put this one together. It's a Stratford Men's Group in Connecticut. And he's got a whole big, and it's really good, I think. And you put it together in a binder, and it's got room to do the inventory and all this stuff. And it takes about 6 months to go through it. So what we would do is get like 4 or 5 guys together, and we pick a name for our group and stuff. And there isn't really a specific leader. You go through it, you're all together. And you don't do your 5 steps in a meeting, but a lot comes out, especially if you're doing it with guys that have been around a little bit. It's amazing what comes out in a group dynamic. And so for over 20 years, I did that consistently. for 20 years. I would do groups and then do individuals. And
so let me ask you real quick. Would you go through the other pieces with the group as well? In other words, like the first step, second step, third step? Or
well, this manual goes through all that. It's not just the inventory.
So it's basically a step study for large groups.
Yeah, or small groups, actually. I do 4 or 5 guys, but it takes you through all the steps. There's certain, you read out of the big book and out of the 12 and 12, and then you come to the group and you answer the questions that are in the manual. And then when you come to the group, you don't do the reading in the group. You answer your questions. You go around the room and everybody gets a turn to answer question number 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 pertaining to that chapter in the big book. So it's a pretty in-depth big book study, and it goes you through the inventory and through the amends process and the whole thing. 6 months. Takes 6 months, meeting once a week. So it's pretty detailed, much more so than the Dr. Paul book. But I still use the Dr. Paul book when a guy's going to do his inventory. I'll give him one of those manuals that say, read the 4-step guide in this. It's really good. It'll help you. That kind of thing. I'm a real believer in one-on-one sponsorship. And part of how I develop compassion and learn how to be close to you is when you're sponsoring somebody one-on-one and you're getting together once a week and you're reading the book, just the two of you. That's an intimate situation. There's a lot of conversation that happens. Things change, and you go through an inventory and you listen to a guy's 5th step, the relationship you have with that individual changes. Then you get them into the amends process. You start going over ends, have them put their amends on a 3x5, and you start discussing that, and you go into more detail about what was written down in the inventory. By the end of this process, you know this person pretty well. And how does he identify with you? Because you tell him your stuff. So essentially, for pretty close to 35 years, I've been reading the book and doing inventories on myself because I'm doing it with them. You never stop doing the work. Now, you can get yourself in a place to where you're the teacher and they're the student and you're not really doing the work yourself. You're guiding them through it. And that's okay. There is a place for that. But when you do it with a group, did I do an inventory every time? No, but I would keep my old one and I would update it if there were resentments. Like the last inventory I did that had any depth at all, the only resentment I could come up with is my children don't love me enough. That is pathetic. That's the best thing I could come up with, I think that's pretty cool, actually. If that's the only thing you can come up with, things must be getting better, I'm essentially pretty bored to tears with myself. I find you much more fascinating. But, I'm constantly reading the book. Right now I've got 2 guys I'm reading the book with. They come over and we read the book, you guys, constantly. It never stops. But each person that you're doing with is different than the one before. Everybody's pretty unique. You get to know people. That's how you do compassion. So in the inventory, you got 4 columns or 3, however you want to do it. I'm not going to argue. It doesn't matter. You're going to do this inventory. And you're going to start taking responsibility for your own life. And you're looking for that 4th column. You're looking for my faults and mistakes. Where's this? And the fear inventory, there's a couple of ways to do this. One of the ones I've liked that I've heard about, and I haven't specifically done it, is you write down the fear that you have. Could be anything, say sharks, whatever it was. Some of them are practical fears. Other ones are, fear of people in general. There's some people that are just afraid. They don't get along well at all. They're very introverted, very shut down. Fear of women. Fear of sickness, fear of illness, fear of getting old. I've been looking at that one. Am I afraid of it? I keep asking myself, are you afraid or are you hiding it with bluster and bravado? And I'm kind of glad I made it, actually. Wasn't looking too good there for a while. But you have these fears. Then you give a brief description of the fear. Some of them are obvious, sharks. Because they're sharks. It's like,
right.
Fear of people. I'm fear of physical confrontation. I'm afraid if I go in public places, a fight's going to break out. can be more specific. Specifically, what are you afraid of? Okay, that's good. Then the other one is, I've heard people talk about this, is that what would my life be like if God were to remove that fear? What would my life be like if I didn't have that fear? I think that's a good question. The other one I like is, have you asked God to remove this fear? I mean, have you gotten on your knees or however you want to do that and said specifically, please take this away from me. I can't do it. Or do you just look at it and hope it goes away? Or have you taken any real action to remove that fear? I think that's good. One of the things a friend of mine says about Steve Lamb, he says the 6th and 7th step. 6th step says we become willing. 7th step says we humbly ask. What Steve says, what most of us do is we become willing, we just don't humbly ask. It's like, and being a godless pagan like I am, listing fears and then actually asking for it to be removed, I wouldn't ever consider doing that. What would I be praying to? But I'll tell you something. When I started doing that, stuff happened. Stuff happened. There's a lot of fears that I have that I don't have anymore. How did that happen? I think through the process of doing this work. Over the years of my sobriety, I've done 3 significant inventories, but I've done a lot of mini ones. Like when I was going through that groups, like updating ones, but I've done 3 where I sat down and really did a full-on inventory. And the third one was pretty minor, actually. The third one was when I started, I wanted to do 5th steps with some of the guys I sponsor to break down that thing. And I did like a current, this is what's going on with me. And there were like 2 or 3 things I just didn't want people to know about me. And nothing big, nothing, just kind of pathetic stuff, like my kids don't love me enough. I mean, when you say that to somebody, like I said that to you, you heard me say that, you immediately laugh like, well, that's pathetic, because it is. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about, that I have these feelings and I keep it to myself because I want you to think I'm more spiritual than I am. I don't want to bring my image down in your eyes. So I did that inventory and I shared it with Matthew and another guy that I sponsored for a long time, just to be, this is what's going on with me, just to get more right sized. But I've done 3 significant inventories over the years, but a lot of minor ones, a lot of like what people would call 10th step or 11th step, kind of like, here's what's going on now, that kind of stuff. And so in the inventory, you go through the fear list. As the years have gone by, the fear list is really kind of more important or more significant than the resentment list. And a lot of my fears are centered around resentments. My belief about that is that the reason I have fears is because I don't have faith. The way that looks in my life today, they asked the Dalai Lama, what's the ultimate spiritual truth? And he said, and has said, all is well. Then he pauses, that Lama pause, and so you're really paying attention, waiting, hanging for what he's going to say. And he repeats it very slowly. All is well. And I have trouble with that. All doesn't seem well to me. I look around the world but I'll tell you something. I have faith that that's true. I have difficulty with it, but I have faith. The source of all the suffering in my life is my inability to accept things just exactly as they are. And today I have faith that everything is absolutely as it should be. It couldn't possibly be any different than it is. That if I think that it should be different, it's just whistling in the dark. It stays the same. This is the way things are. And I have to accept that. Even if I want to change it, I have to accept it. When this faith entered my life, and it took me a while to realize that that is what has happened, I would have never labeled it that. When this faith started happening, when I started really paying attention to the universe as a giving entity, that I'm being supplied with everything I need, the fears subsided.
Hmm.
You know, the promises started really coming more true. And that's an inside thing, not an outside thing. Nothing external has changed. My perception, the psychic change, my perception of the world around me has changed. Do I look at it through rose-colored glasses? No. I'll give you an example of that, of what that looks like. My wife and I went through Yellowstone National Park, because it's been a couple of years now. The wonderful trip. We went on a road trip, 3,000 miles in a couple of weeks. And we were going through Yellowstone Park, and she had never been there, and it had been since I was a kid that I was there. And incredible place, and beautiful place. We're driving along, and there's a bunch of people on the side of the road looking at something out in this meadow, this beautiful meadow, and they've got their spy glasses, their telescopes. We pull over, we stop, we get out, and you can see a wolf eating an elk carcass. And this woman says, "Would you like to look through my telescope?" I go, "Absolutely." So she, and I looked at it. It was stunning. I mean, just raw nature. This wolf just tearing his long, spindly, gnarly looking wolf, eating this elk carcass. And this guy's sitting on the tailgate of his truck behind me. And he says, "You know what happened over there?" I said, "Well, yeah, the wolf killed the elk." And he goes, "Well, more specifically, what happened is there was a cow elk that had a baby, that had a calf. And the wolves came and killed her calf. And she stood there in mourning for a couple of days, mourning the death of her calf. And then the wolves came and took her out." And I looked at the guy and went, "Oh." And he goes, "Yeah." Now we look at that from a human perspective. I go, well, that's not fair. What a sad thing. But there it is. Evidently, this is the way things are. And I can make a judgment about that. I'm human. I can't. Well, that's not fair. I feel sad for the cow elk. What a tragedy in her life. And then she died because she's in mourning. What a sad thing. But there it is. I look at my own life. I've had tragedies in my life. Things have happened. And there it is. It seems to be this is the way life is. Is life a veil of tears? Is that all it is? It hasn't been my experience. I've had some wonderful, very uplifting experiences. I've had love has entered my life. Children have entered my life. I've traveled the world. I've had I've had a good life. The first 20 years were a bit rough, 25 years or so, but I've had a great life. But I have to accept all of it. And human beings are in duality. They want all the good and none of the bad. There should be no bad. And I'm the one labeling it bad. I'm even giving it the name. When Ramesh, I told you about sitting in that back room, and he says, "I love you, alcoholics and drug addicts." The rest of them are trying. At that same seating, my friend Wayne gave him a bumper sticker back in the day. Remember those "shit happens" bumper stickers?
Mm-hmm.
We hand this Indian guru this bumper sticker, and he goes, "Precisely, shit happens. It just happens. I've been saying that for years, But then he said the significant thing. Isn't it interesting that we label it shit? It's just stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff happens. Things just happen. There's no morality to it. It just is. I add the morality and I suffer. I think it shouldn't happen, and it keeps happening, and I suffer. We talked about that in the first step. So here's the fear inventory. If I can get to this place where I realize the light can't exist without the darkness, that there is no duality, there isn't good and bad, everything is just the way it is, the fear has a tendency to drain away. The fear is based on, what if bad things happen to me? Fear is a projection into the future based upon experiences in the past that I've labeled as good and bad. When that begins to go away, when that judgment begins to go away, when faith enters, and I have faith even though I don't like things, that they're the way they're supposed to be, that perception of the universe around me, that psychic change happens. One of the indicators of that is the fear begins to fall away. Now, in the inventory, if what I'm bringing to the table, this life lived with seeming power, the end result is going to be resentment, fear, and in the relationship category, if what I'm bringing to the relationships is resentment and fear, what could I possibly have but dramatic and traumatic relationships?
That's right.
What else could there possibly be but me trying to extract something out of these relationships so that I'll feel better? There's no giving going on here. There's only taking. You know, that's what it's going to look like. When you hear people say, I had to leave that relationship because I wasn't getting my needs met. When I hear that, it just makes my skin crawl.
Mm-hmm.
My needs. What needs do I have that need to be met by you, and you have failed me?
Mm.
I mean, God, that is the epitome of self-centeredness, that I'm going to get this relationship and you need to fulfill my needs. And if you can't do that, I'm going to throw you away and move on to the next one. It's like when your sponsor tells you at some point in your recovery process, when you go to a meeting, are you going there to get something out of it or to add something to it?
Mm-hmm.
And there came a time when I started going to AA meetings to add something to it. I realized that what my job is to find you there. That's where we find each other. That's not where the recovery is.
Mm-hmm.
It's a part of it, though, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the fellowship is key. But really, you know where the recovery happens? Is out in my backyard in my little ashram where we're reading the book and smoking cigars. And that's where recovery is.
Mm-hmm.
I found you in the meeting, or you found me.
Kitchen table AA.
Kitchen table AA. It happens at Denny's at 3:00 in the morning. Back in the day, you could smoke in Denny's. We would smoke, drink coffee, and eat banana splits. 3:00 in the morning. My peer group, the class of 85, you know, that's where the recovery really happened. When we're talking to each other, you know, what'd your sponsor tell you? You know, that kind of stuff.
Bill, this has been enjoyable, as it always is. We basically got through the 4-step. We didn't even get through the third part of the 4-step in full, but we can cover that next time we get together. The broken relationships, sex part, you know, page 69. And that's where we'll pick up when we get together next time. Does that sound like a deal?
Good.
All right, so let me read page 164 of the book. It says, abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us, like me and Mr. Bill C., as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. Keep coming back. It works if you work it. Once again, Mr. Bill C., thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, John.
That is Mr. Bill C., where recovery happens. Well said. If you are out there and you're listening to this episode and you believe that somebody else could benefit from hearing the episode, please take a moment to pause your device and share the episode or the entire podcast with a friend or family member. It would be much appreciated. All right, now on to a little bit of listener feedback for you. The first bit of feedback comes in here from Scarlett. Scarlett writes in and she says, oh my God. Well, she says OMG actually, but I am pretty sure that means oh my God or oh my goodness, however you want to take that, with an exclamation point after. She says, that is so heckin' cool. Now, I had never heard that term before, and that's why I wanted to put this at the top of the listener feedback before or today, just because I love that phrase. That is so heckin' cool. Thank you. We are in Frederick, Maryland. We are or were out of the Frederick Club, which has been going for decades, albeit in different locations. My mom and dad both got sober there, And before I was born, I actually asked my mom about a couple of old timers, and she remembered them. And by the way, when Scarlett started this out by saying this so heckin' cool, she's talking about she had asked me to speak at one of their virtual meetings there, and I said, "Oh well, of course, I am honored to do that, Miss Scarlett." But nonetheless, and then she goes on and says, though she is drinking and has been for quite a few years, she's talking about her mom, she is a functioning alcoholic for the most part. She has always been my rock, and now I'm being gifted the opportunity to be that rock for her, while all this mess is going on in the world. It is very difficult, but I'm letting my higher power take the wheel when it's most needed, and they are coming through for me, and I couldn't be more grateful. That's great. Today, I went shopping for my mom and stepdad, who were both at high risk. Then I was able to administer first aid for my stepfather when he took a nasty fall to calm down my mama, who was on the verge of nervous breakdown over that on top of everything else. I was able to remember that breathing is important in a panic situation, and got her to take some deep breaths with me before they went to the hospital. I was able to calmly clean up the blood off the front porch while they were gone so it wouldn't further traumatize my mom when they got back. Thank God he is okay. Some butterfly sutures and an x-ray. I was watching from the back seat, and I'm so thankful for finding a strength in a power greater than myself. I did lose it a little bit after dropping off some gloves and a jacket at the hospital for my stepdad to keep covered up in case any contaminants were there. But I was able to get to the Zoom meeting. She's talking about the Zoom meeting, and she, I believe, shared on that same meeting here last week in Maryland. What part of Maryland is it again? It is in Frederick, Maryland. Oh, hey, my son just dropped in. Let me give him a hug real quick. Can you say hello to the Sober Speak listeners? Just say hello.
Hello.
Good job. Okay, I'm going to continue on with listener feedback, all right? I was reading Scarlett's letter, just so you know, okay? So, hey, isn't Scarlet Letter, isn't that like a book or something like that? The Scarlet Letter. Have you ever read that in school? Okay, I thought so anyway. All right, so anyway, let me go back. And now I got to find my place. I'm so sorry, Scarlett. But I was able to get back into the Zoom meeting a little late and cry it out there with my family. That's the way it should work, Miss Scarlett. Then we had the group conscience. And again, I watched as I volunteered to chair, lead, host, our Wednesday meeting and find speakers. Wow. Our group is a daily group, and things have shuffled up a little bit since all this happened and meetings switched online. So here I am, agoraphobic old me, reaching out to folks and trying to get speakers. Laugh out loud. God is good. Well, thanks for thinking of me, Miss Scarlett. Being of service will help me get out of my head. I'm sure you can relate. Oh, yes, I can, Miss Scarlett. Then we talk about I don't want to talk about this part because I'm afraid it may give away her anonymity. So I'm going to skip that part. And she says, I actually shared tonight in the Zoom meeting and told them that I've been finding strength in your podcast. Please feel free to ask anything you need about appearing at their group. If I don't know the answer, I'll be happy to find it and let you know. You were actually the first person I ever reached out to for speaking, so I'm kind of winging it. Thank you again so much, Scarlett. Well, Scarlett, I hope this turns out to be a good and pleasant experience for you. You may regret this after hearing my talk. Nonetheless, Jason writes in, and Jason says, hello, John. Thanks for reaching out. My name is Jason P. I almost said his last name. I'm an alcoholic. I live in Poulsbo, Washington. Poulsbo. I'll just go with that, Washington. My sobriety date is 12/21/2013. My home group is the Oasis Group. What a cool name for a group. And we meet on Saturday at 7:30 a.m. and study the Big Book and the 12 by 12. I have a sponsor who has a sponsor, and I sponsor men. 22 years of bouncing in and out of the rooms in an ugly way taught me that I have to carry the message. I plan on sticking around. So far, I've only browsed through the Sober Speak speakers, but my plan is to start listening more depth this evening. Thanks again, Jason. Well, Jason, I am glad you found us, and I am glad you're browsing, and I hope you enjoy the speakers. If you have any feedback on them, please let me know. David K. writes in from the Al-Anon family group. And David says, John, I'm a son of 2 alcoholic parents from Long Beach, California. I started my recovery in Alateen long enough to get the gift of Alateen, which was a drug-addicted girlfriend, ! I hit a bottom after leaving the program on October 3rd, 1997. I was 22. My parents and older sister were all sober. So as in the alcoholic, the drinking is just a symptom for the family as well. The day before my dad had a stroke, I prayed for his death my whole life and was faced with his death. I struggled in Al-Anon for years as I focused on the differences because sadly, too often, the focus seems to be on others. This program was introduced to me by Bill C. from Torrance. All the best. David K. from Long Beach, California. Thank you, David, for writing in. I really do appreciate it. Michael writes in and he says, John, here's another gentleman who's friends with Bill C. I am good friends with Bill C., who has been doing the steps on your show. He told me about your show. I'm happy to access it as I now live in Sicily. Thank you, Michael T. And he actually gave me his phone number. Now, if I were to read that phone number, I should do that someday. Just like have this go out in thousands and thousands and thousands of people and just see who gets a text just for the heck of it. Nah, I'm not going to do that. I wouldn't want anybody to do that to me. But anyway, thank you for Michael for writing in, who now lives in Sicily. Sicily. Oh, that's a one spicy meatball. It's the pizza pie. I'm so sorry. You know, I wonder how Italians imitate Americans and you know, and this is something, I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent. This is something else I think about sometimes. So when we imitate people that are from Italy, and I'm not saying it's even accurate at all, but you know, like over here in America, we say stuff like it's a one spicy meatball and it's a pizza pie. But as soon as an Italian comes to New Jersey, all of a sudden we're saying, oh, how you doing? So what happens when people come from Italy and move over to New Jersey? What is that? How does that occur? That language and accent just it blows up. Okay, I'm going off the rails now. I'm so sorry. Anyway, Susan writes in from oh gosh. You know, this quarantine is getting to me, folks. I think it's time for me to get out of the house. In fact, after this, I'm going to go take a walk out of my neighborhood. But anyway, Susan writes in from Ireland, and she says, hello. No, that's not she said, what's a brogue? Anyway, she says, John, I refer to episode 128, Stephen F., when he mentioned his third step prayer, which comes from A Course in Miracles. This is a prayer that I also use on a regular basis. I was pleasantly surprised to hear Stephen F. mention it. It is so relative to AA's third step. I printed it off and have given it to many of my AA friends. Brilliant. That's what people from the United Kingdom say. Oh, wait a second. United Kingdom and Ireland are now separate. But I think, no, isn't that right? Yeah. Ireland's its own thing, and then the United Kingdom's the rest. But nonetheless, brilliant to hear Stephen F. mention it. Keep up the good work. XXX Susan from Ireland. She's from Dublin. And she also sent me the copy of that prayer she was referencing. So thank you, Miss Susan from Dublin. We appreciate it. And XXX back at you. XXX in the, like, kiss kiss, kiss. I think that's what that means. I'm sure it does back in Ireland. Hug, hug, kiss, kiss, whatever. I'm sorry. Anyway, Susan writes in and she says, "Hi, John. My name is Sue." I guess it's Sue. I apologize. Well, but then she signs it Susan, I think. Nonetheless, I guess it could be, she could go both ways. You know what I mean. Anyway, like she goes by Sue and Susan. Nonetheless, my name is Sue. I live in Aurora, Colorado, which is a suburb of Denver. Yes, ma'am, I have been there. My sobriety date is May 20th, 1998. I came to the rooms of on October 20th, 1987, after 20 years of alcohol and drugs, and I was a stumbling mess, but never really left. 20 seems to be the magical number for me. Just notice. Well, I am so glad that you came to that revelation while writing in to me at SoberSpeak. Anyway, she says, my granddaughter introduced me to the podcast app last year. When the stay-at-home order hit, I browsed the podcast for AA, and I found you in big capital letters, exclamation point. I love this. Your speakers are excellent. I am hooked. Thanks so much for your service, Sue or Susan, who goes both ways. You know what I'm saying, right? All right. Chris D DMs me on the IG, and Chris D says, John, thank you so much for all you do. I also chair a speaker meeting in my hometown of Pocatello, Idaho. Our meeting is called A Vision for You. And at the end of the meeting, we also read the same passage out of page 164 that you do. This is my third week listening to your podcast, and I'm loving every minute of it. May the God of your understanding bless you and your family on this Easter day. He wrote on Easter Day. Your very grateful, recovered friend, Chris D. Well, thank you, Chris D. Thank you for writing in. I think, folks, that is another week of listener feedback. And it is another episode in the bank. Does you say in the bank, or do you say in the bank, in the reserves, okay. So now I know this, when I have an episode that's like that is one that I have out there waiting to be released. That one is in the can. Oh, maybe it's on the books, in the books. Nonetheless, you know what I'm saying. We're finished and this one is over. This particular episode right here. Now, I will try to make it back next week. I always say 1 week at a time. I truly mean that. I don't know if I'm going to get to make it back, but so far, I don't think I've missed a week in like 2 years or whatever, even when I thought I was going to miss them. Even through the flu, I'm kind of like the postman. Is that what it is? Yeah, the postman, through sleet and rain. Now, I don't have to deal with the sleet and rain, but I do have to deal with other instances coming up in my life. All right, that's it. God bless you. Love y'all. We'll probably see you next week. Once again, thanks for listening in. Keep coming back, folks. It truly does work if you work it.